What if I told you that one of the few lawmakers still brave enough to defy both parties just stood up in Congress and demanded the release of files that could shake the foundations of American power? Files that for years have been whispered about behind closed doors, buried under ongoing investigations, and quietly locked away from the public eye. This moment wasn't about politics, it was about truth. And for once, someone on Capitol Hill finally said what millions of Americans have been shouting for years. It's time to let the light in. Because when Congressman Jamie Raskin took the floor, the room went silent. Not out of respect, but out of fear. Fear of what might come out if those files were ever unsealed. He wasn't talking in riddles or partisan slogans. He was looking straight at his colleagues and asking the simplest question possible.
Substitute to H.R. 4371 offered by Mr. Raskin.
Objection. The amendment be considered as read. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized to explain.
The amendment, Mr. Chairman, thank you, ensures the release of all files associated with Alex Acosta in the Epstein affair. The gentleman from New York focuses our attention on the fact that this was being investigated back in 2004, 5, and 6. And in May of 2007, an assistant U.S. attorney working for DOJ prepared a draft 60 criminal count indictment against Epstein. 60 criminal counts: statutory rape, solicitation, human trafficking, conspiracy, and so on. They had a very comprehensive and complex understanding of what Epstein was doing, how he was funding it, who was involved in it. And just 2 months later, Epstein's attorneys met with the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida. That U.S. Attorney would later become famous as Donald Trump's Secretary of Labor. But at that point, he was leading the investigation, and he offered to end the investigation and throw away those 60 federal charges completely if Epstein would plead guilty to the state charge of solicitation. Now that has got to be the sweetest, coziest, sweetheart deal ever made by a federal prosecutor. They've got this guy dead to rights on 60 criminal counts of running a comprehensive child sex trafficking conspiracy, an international one. For those of you who are sticklers for materiality and relevance, an international child sex trafficking ring. And they gave it all away. They accepted a short jail stay for him. So what did he get to do down there in Florida? Well, he pled guilty and he got 18 months in a minimum security facility. He was allowed to leave for 12 hours a day to work at a foundation he founded, and apparently continued doing exactly what he was doing before. And I don't want to be too graphic and lurid because there might be kids watching, but he was doing precisely the kinds of things that we're talking about in terms of the protection of children. He was violating children, violating young women, and then he would go and spend the night in jail. And in the meantime, he was able to bargain immunity for all of these other people who were working for him.
The gentleman yield.
Yes, by all means.
In other words, while he was doing all the sexual predation, the government was providing room and board and meals and making it cheap of him to do so.
Well, that's not a bad way of looking at it, especially because apparently it was a very comfy jail cell they set up for him. Now, I'm sure he would have preferred to be back in one of his mansions, which were basically sexual dungeons for the young women and girls that got swept up in his sex conspiracy, which was something that the vast majority of Americans deplore and abhor and want to get to the bottom of and want to know the truth about. But anyway, he spent those nights, and then they wiped the slate clean for him to continue to go on and do it again and again and again. This is a guy who should have immediately been prosecuted and then convicted and sent to prison for the rest of his life for what he had done. Now, Ghislaine Maxwell was prosecuted and convicted as a felony sex offender and sentenced to 20 years in jail. She just got transferred out of her prison to a club fed in. Sex offenders are not normally allowed. Felony sex offenders are not normally allowed there, but after she spoke to the president's former criminal defense attorney, who's now working in the Department of Justice, and he liked what he heard. She was immediately transferred over to this very comfy arrangement in Texas. She skipped over months and months of the normal process where you have to prove there's some compelling reason to be transferred from one facility to another under the rules of the Bureau of Prisons. She bypassed all of that and she got sent over to this other prison because, well, Mr. Blanche liked what he heard when he went over to talk to her. Come on, we're the Congress of the United States. The framers of the Constitution thought that we would stand up for integrity and we would stand up for our interests and not be servile, partisan sycophants to the President of the United States. So let us all show some backbone today. Let's say we don't move forward on this legislation until the Epstein-Acosta file is released. Let's vote for that, everybody. And if you're serious about getting the truth of it, you will support my amendment. I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. I would just point out that the director of the FBI will be sitting at that table 1 week from today, and all the questions and concerns Mr. Moskowitz raised, he can ask the director, he can ask him right to his face, and we'll get the answers. And then with regards to Mr. Acosta, he will be being deposed on the 19th of this month. So in 9 days, he'll set for a deposition where he will be under oath, and Mr. Garcia, who has the job that Mr. Raskin used to have, can ask him all the questions and make all the points that the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee just raised.
But Mr. Chairman, you would agree that the questioning...
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Wouldn't the question be more meaningful if we actually had the file to look
Mr.
at?
Chairman, I insist on my point of order.
Gentleman insists on his point of order. Does the sponsor of the amendment... I'll recognize the gentleman.
Thank you. I'm reminded of Churchill's definition of a fanatic, a man who can't change his mind and won't change the subject. But the subject has nothing to do with immigration law, which is the subject of this bill, and therefore the gentleman's amendment would introduce material beyond the scope and purpose of the bill before us. It violates House Rule 16, Clause 7. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman from Maryland wish to respond?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I suppose I am a fanatic for child safety. I am a fanatic against child sex trafficking. Yes, I am. And I will be a fanatic to stand up for the public interest and the vast majority of Americans who want the truth to come out and don't want to sweep it under the rug.
Then the
Tuesday's
gentleman
my
will support
time.
this
It's my
bill.
time. I'm not yielding to you right now. I've heard enough from you. Now, Mr. Epstein's victims included aspiring models from abroad, including South America. He had a whole team working in France.
The gentleman,
used-
the gentleman should focus on the point of order.
This is focusing on the point of order, Mr. Chairman, because
All
I'm
right,
talking
just-
about
just-
the international dimension.
Just reminding the gentleman who spoke more than anyone today here at this hearing and has said that he's not going to support the bill, as the gentleman from California just pointed out. So if you can stay focused
I
on the point
wanna-
of order, that'll be good.
I would love to support the bill if you support the release of the Epstein file and the Acosta file. I mean, let's.
We're forgetting all the information. We're forgetting all that information out, and that's why I've told you about.
Well, let's get it out today.
Mr. Acosta's deposition and Mr.
We've heard a lot of promises
Coming
about getting it
from the
out.
committee.
We haven't seen much action. A lot of promises, but no action. Today, we could take some action. The gentleman suggests that my amendment is not in order because it's not germane to the question of international child trafficking and illegal immigration. Well, Mr. Epstein's victims, including aspiring models and girls being taken advantage of from South American countries and from Europe and France. He used a ring of associates to rotate the women and girls in and out of sexual servitude in different countries, in different places, using fraudulent modeling visas to transport them across state lines and across international borders. He tracked their availability and their proximity using this database. This is exactly what we're talking about. It's hard to see how it could be more material, more germane, and more relevant. It's also the case that air traffic controllers in the Virgin Islands observed Mr. Epstein leaving his private plane in 2018 with girls who testimony suggested were as young as 11 or 12 years old.
If you really care about protecting kids, why are you still protecting the people who hurt them? That's how this all began. A hearing that was supposed to be about an immigration bill suddenly turned into a standoff about corruption, secrecy, and accountability. And for a brief moment, the masks came off. You could see it in the way lawmakers shifted in their seats, avoided eye contact, tried to interrupt, and questioned Raskin's sanity instead of his evidence. Because what he was saying wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. Dangerous to the people who have spent decades making sure these files never see the light of day. That Raskin's amendment was simple. The bill, he said, shouldn't move forward until every page of the Epstein files was made public. Not summaries, not redacted snippets. The full case file, everything that had been kept hidden, the ones they don't want us to see. Because, as he put it, America doesn't want dribs and drabs. We want the truth. And that's when the hearing changed tone entirely. You could feel the tension tighten, because this wasn't about one man's crimes. It was about the system that protected him. What made this so explosive wasn't just the mention of a notorious name, but what those documents might contain. In the last 48 hours alone, the Oversight Committee had received what's being called Epstein's 50th birthday book. Inside were disturbing images, private notes, and drawings that officials had denied existed for years. Among them, an alleged note from a former president, the authenticity still under dispute, scribbled with a message too strange to ignore. May every day be another beautiful secret. Raskin didn't speculate. He just stated the facts, laid them on the table, and said, the American people deserve to see it for themselves. And that's when the room cracked. One congressman jumped in, calling Raskin deranged, accusing him of going off topic. But it wasn't deranged to demand transparency. It was threatening to those who've benefited from silence. And instead of debating the substance of his argument, they mocked him for bringing it up at all. That's how fragile power becomes when it's exposed to light. When truth starts cutting too close to privilege, the defense isn't logic, it's insult. But Raskin didn't back down. Calmly, he replied that if anyone doubted his facts, they should simply prove him wrong. Because no one had actually challenged the evidence. No one denied the plea deal, the sealed names, or the leniency that let a powerful predator walk free. They just wanted to bury the conversation before it went any further. That's the playbook. Stall, distract, deny, and move on. Except this time, someone refused to move on. To understand why that mattered, you have to remember what started this mess in the first place. Years ago, a federal prosecutor had a multi-count indictment ready against Epstein. Dozens of victims, clear patterns, financial trails, everything. But the case was suddenly traded for a single low-level charge under state law. Overnight, the federal case disappeared. The man at the center of it served time in a local facility, free to leave during the day, living almost normally. The justification? None that made sense. The result? A message that wealth, connections, and status could buy your way out of justice. That deal didn't just protect Epstein. It protected everyone around him. The unnamed co-conspirators, the powerful clients, the enablers. And for years, both political parties treated it like a ghost. They'd nod solemnly when it came up, promise to look into it, and then quietly move on to safer topics. That's why Raskin's stand was so rare. He wasn't just calling for the files to be opened. He was calling for a reckoning. A chance for the public to see who was complicit, who looked away, and who helped bury the truth. Because make no mistake, this wasn't about partisanship. This was about power. Power that flows through money, influence, and silence. The kind that crosses every aisle, every ideology, and every institution. The kind that ensures some names never make the headlines. And that's what terrified that hearing room. Because if those files came out, if every document, every name, every transaction was exposed, Washington would never look the same again. The question now isn't whether there's corruption. Everyone knows there is. The question is who still has the courage to confront it when it's no longer politically convenient. Because, let's be honest, transparency sounds good in press releases. But when the light turns inward, when it shines on friends, donors, and colleagues, that's when the silence starts. And that's exactly what Raskin was challenging. He wasn't pointing fingers at a party. He was pointing a spotlight at the system itself. He said something that deserves to echo far beyond that room. Are we on the side of transparency and accountability, or on the side of those who protect the predators? That's not a partisan question. It's a moral one. And you could almost feel the discomfort ripple through the air. Because the answer, deep down, exposes why the fight for truth is so hard to win. When justice starts knocking on doors that lead too close to power, The instinct isn't to cooperate, it's to lock them tighter. And yet, for every lawmaker who scoffed, there are millions of Americans watching this, wondering the same thing. Why can't we see the truth? Why, in a democracy built on transparency, are the most powerful secrets still treated as sacred? Every day, new fragments leak out, names half-hidden, testimonies sealed, evidence redacted. Each time, it's just enough to spark outrage, but never enough to reveal the full picture. That's how control works. By giving you a glimpse and calling it disclosure, that Raskin's message cut deeper than politics because it forced everyone to confront that hypocrisy. We can't preach law and order while turning a blind eye to the powerful. We can't claim to fight trafficking while hiding the names of those who enabled it. You can't defend democracy while shielding corruption under the banner of ongoing investigation. Real accountability means sunlight for everyone, or it means nothing at all. What makes this story so powerful is how universal it is. You don't need to be left or right to want justice. You don't have to agree on policies to agree that crimes against children should never be hidden. And yet, here we are, arguing over whether the public should even see the evidence. That's not justice. That's theater. And it's one that's been playing far too long. But this hearing, this moment, showed a rare glimpse of something different. It showed what it looks like when someone in power refuses to play the game. When someone stands in that chamber and says, "Enough. No more secrets. No more excuses." Because that's what's really at stake here. Trust. Every time the government hides behind classified, ongoing, or not relevant, it chips away at the last thing that keeps a democracy alive: the people's belief that truth still matters. Raskin reminded everyone that transparency isn't a threat to democracy. It's its lifeline. Without it, the system rots from the inside. Without it, justice becomes performance. Without it, power answers only to itself. And maybe that's why so many in that room seemed uncomfortable, because he wasn't just demanding the truth about one scandal. He was exposing the decay of the entire machine. And here's the uncomfortable truth. If we can't face what's inside those files, then we're admitting something far darker: that justice has limits. That truth depends on who it might embarrass. That accountability only applies to those without the connections to escape it. But that's not what this country is supposed to stand for. What happens next will say everything. Whether lawmakers choose courage or comfort, whether the truth finally comes out, or whether another generation of victims gets told to wait, and whether the public keeps demanding answers or gets distracted again. But one thing's clear: this story isn't just about a hearing or an amendment. It's about whether democracy still has the guts to look itself in the mirror, because real justice doesn't fear sunlight. It invites it. And if you've ever wondered why certain files stay sealed, why certain names vanish, why every time the truth gets close someone changes the subject, this hearing just gave you the answer. Power protects itself. Always has. Until someone refuses to let it. That's what makes Jamie Raskin's stand historic. Not because it's convenient, but because it's uncomfortable. Because he's not asking for political points. He's asking for proof that America still believes no one is above the law. And that, in this climate, is the most radical idea of all. So, the next time someone says transparency doesn't matter, remember this moment. Remember who stood for truth when others mocked it. Remember that sunlight doesn't destroy nations, it saves them. Because if we can't demand accountability for the crimes we already know happened, then what hope do we have for the ones we don't? The truth shouldn't belong to a few. It belongs to everyone. And that's why this story matters, not just for what's in those files, but for what it says about us as a country. If you believe the truth still matters, if you believe justice shouldn't have a price tag, if you believe corruption should never hide behind power, then keep this conversation alive. Share this story. Spread the word. And most importantly, make sure the people who work for you, the ones sitting in those chairs, know that silence is no longer an option. Because when the powerful fear the truth, that's when the people must demand it louder than ever. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who still believes in accountability, and subscribe to stay part of the fight for real transparency. The story isn't over, because the truth always finds its way out.